The snow had come early that year, sudden, unmerciful, as if the sky itself had tired of holding back. It fell in thick, drifting veils across the timberline, swallowing the dirt trail that curved up from the valley. By the time it reached the high ridge and the cluster of cabins clinging there like stubborn thorns, it had turned to ice, crusting windows, sealing doors. Hope Eldon had long since stopped expecting gentleness from the seasons. She stood in the threshold of her cabin, wrapped in a blanket she'd stitched from the remains of 3 old quilts, watching the wind pluck shingles from the stable roof. Her boots crunched the snow where it packed against the step. The kettle inside had begun to whistle, soft and weary like an old dog whining in its sleep. But she didn't move to answer it, because something else was there. Just beyond the gate, where the trail forked toward the dead woods, a dark shape slumped forward in the snow. She blinked once, twice. It wasn't a deer, nor bear, not a coyote, either. Wrong color, wrong stillness. This thing didn't move like an animal. It didn't move at all. She moved before thinking. Blanket still over her shoulders, she trudged out into the storm, skirts dragging snow. Her breath smoked around her face. The shape took form as she neared it. A man, tall, broad across the back, though hunched now, collapsed on his side. His boots were worn through at the toes, laced with rawhide. The soles were red with blood. His coat, buckskin old, cracked, was soaked through. Frost had gathered in his hair. She knelt beside him. His lips were pale, his cheeks hollow, his eyes half-lidded, fixed on nothing. "Sir," she asked, gently, like she was waking a child from a bad dream. "Can you hear me?" No answer. Just a shallow breath, steaming from cracked lips. Hope touched his shoulder. The man's eyes twitched. He looked at her. And in that moment, despite the gray haze that dulled them, she saw no fear, no shame, only the quiet of a soul too tired to flinch anymore. He wasn't white. His skin was copper bronze, marked by a single scar that ran from his temple to the hinge of his jaw. Black hair, tied back. His cheek bore the faint trace of war paint, faded by snow. Apache. Her mouth went dry. A dozen thoughts clattered through her head, none of them useful. She should ride for the sheriff, should leave him, should be afraid. But none of those thoughts mattered as much as the way his body shook under her hand. "Come on," she said softly. "I don't want you dying out here." He didn't resist when she dragged his arm over her shoulders. Didn't help either. He was too far gone. It took everything she had to drag him through the snow, through her gate, through the front door that slammed hard behind them. Inside, warmth hit them both like a wave. The fire was low, but alive. The kettle hissed. Her little cabin, just one room and a loft, smelled of pine tar, iron stove, and the soup she hadn't finished. She eased him onto the cot near the wall, the one that had stayed empty since her boy passed 2 winters ago. Then she worked quickly, stripping off his coat, cutting away the frozen laces of his boots, wrapping his feet in wool. His skin burned. Fever. She fetched water, bathed his face, boiled a basin of tea, and held the cup to his lips. He didn't drink, only turned his face slightly, as if confused by the shape of her presence. "I don't know your name," she murmured, tucking a blanket around him. "But I reckon you'll live if I don't let go." He didn't answer. His eyes had closed again. She sat beside the cot, listening to the wind slam against the walls. Night had come while she worked, silent and full of weight. She didn't light the lamp. Didn't need to. The fire offered just enough light to keep the dark at bay, but not enough to invite ghosts. Hope didn't sleep much that night. She kept watch, dozing in and out, always half listening to the rhythm of his breath. Once, just before dawn, she caught him watching her through slitted eyes. He looked away when she met his gaze. Not out of shame, just out of habit maybe. The kettle shrieked. She poured more tea, brought it to his side again. This time he took a sip. Not much. Enough. "You're safe," she said. "For now." Again, no answer. Later, when the storm broke for a spell, she stepped outside to chop wood. Her fingers were stiff, aching with old frostbite scars. The air smelled like pine bark and cold iron. When she came back in, he was sitting upright. He'd folded his blanket, set his boots beside the fire. He was trying, clumsily, to lace them back on. She knelt in front of him. "No, you can't go yet. You're not strong enough." He didn't look at her, just moved slower, deliberately, as though he couldn't understand her words, but understood her meaning. She touched his hand, lightly, then pulled it away. "You're deaf, aren't you?" she said, mostly to the room. Still nothing. But his hands froze. She stood, crossed to the table, found a scrap of coal and a plank of wood. She wrote, "Can you read this?" He stared. Then, slow as the snow melting off the roof, he nodded once. A shiver ran down her spine. Not fear. Something else. Something like knowing a river would flood before it did. She tried again. "You're safe here." He watched the letters. Not her mouth. She added, "Do you want to stay?" This time he didn't nod. But his hand moved. He pointed to the fire, then to his boots, then held up 2 fingers. She didn't understand. But he repeated the motion, slower, with care. Then she got it. 2 days. That's what he asked for. She wiped the board clean. 2 days. Then what? He didn't answer. Just leaned back on the cot, exhaled, and closed his eyes. She left him be. The next morning, she woke to the sound of a wagon passing. The roads had cleared a little. She went outside and saw Mrs. Ray's buggy clattering past, pulled by a twitchy gray. The older woman glanced toward her cabin with narrowed eyes. Her gloved hand pulled her shawl higher. Hope knew what that meant. Inside, the Apache man, still silent, was pouring water from the kettle into a chipped bowl, then folding the last of her towels. His movements were careful, intentional, as if living in someone else's home meant borrowing nothing but the warmth. She watched him. He didn't look up, just set the towel aside and reached for his coat. "I never said thank you," she whispered, though she knew he wouldn't hear, "for not dying on my porch." Outside, the wind began again. Inside, something else was stirring, slower than the storm, but heavier than fear. She couldn't name it yet, but she felt it, in the way he moved around her stove like it was sacred, in the way he paused before touching anything of hers, as if asking permission without needing words. He'd only promised 2 days, but part of her already knew. He would not be gone before the 3rd, and neither, by then, would she. The storm did not leave. It settled deeper instead, nestling into the hills, frosting every fence post, burying the paths that once pointed somewhere. And so he stayed. She didn't ask his name again. She no longer needed to. In the hush of the blizzard, they began to find other ways of speaking. Each morning, she'd wake before the frost burned off the windows, only to find he had already swept the hearth clean. Her woodpile, which he stacked in clumsy rows, was now ordered in tight columns outside the door. The holes in her barn roof were patched with leather. He moved like a man who'd always known solitude, quiet, efficient, invisible where needed, but not empty. When she tried to thank him with food, he only nodded. When she offered words, he tilted his head slightly, gaze fixed not on her eyes, but on her lips. That's when she knew for certain. The signs had always been there, the way he turned his body to see her mouth, the way he missed the wind's whistle or the kettle's cry. Once, a pan had clattered from the shelf behind him. He hadn't flinched. He was deaf. And the silence wasn't between them. It was within him. Yet it was full of something. Not absence, but intention. His was a silence built with meaning. She tested it one day. She took the coal and board again, drew 2 words. "You. Me." Then made a sweeping motion between them. He watched her fingers, then the board. She pointed to him, tapped her chest, waited. He nodded once. They were understood. That became their rhythm. The stove always warm, the silence not cruel, but companionable. He repaired things she hadn't known were broken, tightened the loose handle on her cupboard, lined the firewood bin with thick hide, shaped a wooden spoon to replace one that had splintered. One evening, she found him in the barn, bent over a patch of leather. Her late husband's saddle, long untouched, forgotten, lay open before him. He was mending the stirrup. Hope stepped back into the shadows, uncertain of the ache that rose in her chest. She hadn't spoken that man's name in 2 winters. And now a stranger's hands, calm and sure, worked over what he'd left behind. She didn't interrupt. She let the snow keep falling. She let the leather stitch back into something usable. At supper, she set out 2 bowls again. He joined her without prompting. She'd made stew thin but hot. As they ate, he glanced at a drawing on the mantel. Her son's face sketched in charcoal, still childish, with a crooked smile. The man studied it for a long time. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. He looked back down at his bowl. Then he picked up the coal. On the back of the wood board, he drew something, clumsy lines, but careful. A small figure beside a larger one. 2 stick figures. A child and a man. She watched, holding her breath. He wrote beneath it in slow, unsure letters. "You mother?" She nodded. Her throat felt tight. He didn't write anything else. He just tapped his chest, once, over the heart. Then returned to eating. That night, she sat longer than usual by the fire. He had gone to the cot and turned his back, but she stayed up, her fingers resting over the worn edge of the coal board. What did it mean, this peace they'd made? Was it built on pity? On loneliness? Or had something more quiet and lasting begun to take root? She didn't know. But she wasn't afraid of it. 2 days became 4. On the 5th, a knock came. Hope answered with her shawl clutched close. Benji stood outside, cheeks flushed red with cold, a scarf pulled to his ears. "Ma says you got company," he said, breath puffing. "She told me not to come. But I wanted to bring this." He held up a loaf of bread, lumpy, burned on one side. Hope smiled. "I'm sure it'll taste like cake to us," she said. Benji stepped inside, wide-eyed. He glanced at the man by the fire. The man didn't turn, just carved a sliver of pine with steady hands. "He don't talk." Benji whispered. "No." "Why?" "He can't hear." Benji blinked. "Oh." Then, after a moment, "Can he still play checkers?" She laughed. "Ask him yourself." Benji sat cross-legged by the fire, pulling out a battered board from the cupboard. The man looked to Hope for meaning. She pointed to the board, then tapped her chin. He nodded, understanding slowly, and joined the boy. They didn't speak, but they played. And Benji didn't seem to mind the silence. When the game ended, the boy left. Hope watched him disappear into the white veil of snow, shoulders small, but heart full. That night, she wrote again. "Why did you come here?" He stared at the words. She thought he wouldn't answer. But then he picked up the coal. Nowhere else. She waited. But he did not continue. She cleared the board. "Do you want to leave?" His answer came slower. He erased and rewrote the same letters over and over until it read, "I don't know." Outside, the wind picked up, a storm's edge returning. She rose and added another log to the fire. When she turned back, he was holding something out. A small carved shape, wood, smooth as riverstone. An animal. A fox. She took it. He pointed to the fox. Then to her. She furrowed her brow. "Me?" She wrote. He nodded. She smiled, touched by the odd gentleness of it. "Why a fox?" He mimed sharp eyes, quick feet, then made a curling motion near his mouth. A smile. She laughed, a sound that surprised them both. That night, sleep came late. She dreamed of walking through snow, a fox at her heels. The wind in her dream was warm, and the sky over the ridges glowed soft pink like spring was waiting. But the real dawn brought no such warmth. Hope woke to voices outside. She rose slowly, clutching her robe tight, stepping to the door. Mrs. Ray's buggy sat in the lane, 3 others beside it. Mr. Hobbs, Lyle Dawson, 2 women she didn't know by name. Their eyes all narrowed toward her cabin, toward the faint trail of smoke that curled from her stovepipe. Mrs. Ray called out, "You best come out and speak, Hope Eldon. We've been watching." Hope stepped onto the porch. Snow clung to the rails like lace. Her boots sank 2 inches deep. "You got a man in there," Mrs. Ray snapped. "An Indian. One what don't even talk. You think people won't ask questions?" Hope didn't answer. Another voice, Hobbs, added, "Folks say he's Apache. That true?" "He ain't harmed no one," Hope said, voice calm. "He's just trying to heal." "And what are you trying to do, Miss Eldon?" Mrs. Ray hissed. "Nursing a savage like a stray? Living under one roof, no minister, no paper between you? You mean to scandalize every child in this town?" I mean to keep a man from dying, she said. And that's not a sin. You'd best mind how you speak, girl. We'll not have sin dressed up as charity. The others murmured. One of the women crossed herself. Hope stepped down from the porch. You've come far to speak your piece, she said. Now ride back. This is my land, and he is my guest. But how long will he be that, Hope? How long before guest becomes something else? She didn't answer. The group turned and rode off, the snow muffling their retreat. When she stepped back inside, he was sitting by the fire, sharpening the end of a stick. His hands had stopped working, though. They rested still now. She moved to the table, wrote the words. They want you gone. He read them, then nodded once slowly. She wiped the board, wrote again. Do you want to go? He paused, then answered. If you say. Her heart stung. She cleared the board, set down the coal, and reached for the small fox carving on the shelf. She placed it in his hands, then mouthed the words slowly. You are not alone anymore. He watched her lips, and this time, his nod was not uncertain. The wind howled harder that night. Snow swept over the ridgeline again, but the cabin stayed warm. Inside, two souls who had learned to speak without sound waited to see what the world might demand of them next. But for now they had warmth, and kindness, and something beginning that could not yet be named, but could be felt in the space between two chairs, a fire, and a silence that no longer felt like absence, but like promise. By the seventh day, the snow had settled like judgment, thick, unmoving, eternal. The storm had calmed, but its memory clung to the town in silence, and with it came the whispers. It began with glances, then with the pause in conversation when Hope passed by, her shawl wrapped high and her head bowed. A question floated from one porch to another like smoke. How long had she let him stay? Not just overnight, not just during a storm, but afterward, when any God-fearing soul would have sent him on his way with a crust of bread and a prayer for distance. She didn't answer the whispers. She had always been quiet ever since her son died and the church bells rang only once. But this time, the silence wasn't grief, it was resistance. Inside her cabin, the man they feared was mending a cracked stirrup, fingers strong, movement sure. He had fixed the loft's broken ladder and added a brace to the porch step without being asked. Every act was quiet, as if he knew the sound of kindness frightened more folks than cruelty ever could. She brought him coffee one morning, black, bitter, warming. He took the mug with two hands, nodding once in thanks. His eyes, always watching her lips, now held something steadier. Not quite affection, but certainty. She had begun to speak slower, mouthing her words more clearly. He had started replying with gestures, small, precise ones that her heart began to understand before her mind did. When he brought her a carved comb made of polished bone, she had touched his wrist and smiled. When he repaired the broken lock on her barn, she had made him stew, thick and peppered, and set the table with her best tinware. She hadn't asked for anything in return, and still the town decided. They gathered on a Thursday in the church's back room, where the windows faced east, and the light came in harsh and honest. No minister presided, no sheriff either. Just Mrs. Ray in her black gloves and Mr. Hobbs with his ledger and that sunken look like he'd bitten down on something sour and it wouldn't let go. The facts are clear, Mrs. Ray began, voice clipped. Hope Eldon is sheltering an Apache man. They live under one roof, alone. No family, no bond. Someone muttered something about decency. She's widowed, another said. She's got her land. She's quiet. She's kind, added a boy's voice, Benji's. His mother pulled him back by the collar. Mr. Hobbs cleared his throat. No one questions her nature, but the town must uphold certain moral standards. We are not lawless. Mrs. Ray's lips thinned. She is not married, yet she keeps him. There it was. A vote was taken, not written, just hands raised. Some reluctantly, some eagerly. Some didn't raise theirs at all, but that, too, was taken as silence against the righteous. By sundown, the town had spoken. The next morning, Hope heard the knock. She was mixing flour and water, sleeves rolled to her elbows. When it came, 2 raps, then a pause. She opened the door slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. 3 men stood there: Hobbs, Dawson, and the minister's son, who looked anywhere but at her face. "Ma'am," Hobbs said, removing his hat, "we come with a message." She said nothing. There was a meeting yesterday. Still she waited. "We've come to a consensus. The town can't abide a woman and a man, not wed, living under one roof. Not without scandal. Not when he's—" Hobbs stopped, eyes shifting. "A stranger," she offered. He nodded, grateful. Hope leaned against the doorframe. The sky above them was pale and hard, like a frozen lake. "What do you want?" she asked. "Marriage," Dawson said flatly. "Or exile." Her mouth twitched. "Those are the choices? A woman of virtue don't share her hearth without promise," Hobbs said. "And this man, he don't belong. Yet he's harmed no one." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" "Appearances," the minister's son whispered, before flinching under Hobbs's glare. Hope stood a moment longer, then closed the door, not with force, but with finality. Inside, the man had risen. He watched her walk past him. She reached for the coal board, wrote slowly, "They say we must marry, or you must leave." He read the words, eyes flicking from the board to her lips. She erased it, wrote again, "Do you want to leave?" He didn't nod this time. Instead, he stepped outside, into the snow, and faced the trees as if listening. When he came back, he took the board himself. His hand was steady as he wrote, "I will not stay where I am not wanted." She watched him, then took the coal. "You are wanted. By me." He blinked. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she did not falter. "This town is not what gives you a place. I do." He took the coal again. "They hate what they don't understand." She nodded, then wrote, "Then let them see it clearly. They wed at dusk. No church. No prayers. No witnesses beyond Benji and the wind." She wore her mother's shawl. He wore a clean shirt, sewn by her hands. They stood beneath the bare cottonwood behind her cabin, its limbs like reaching arms. Her voice was steady as she said what needed saying, not vows, not scripture, but something older. "I will not walk this land without you now. I will not make a fire that does not warm you." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and placed a small carving into her palm. It was another fox. This one smaller, rounder, curled in sleep. She kissed it. Not him. Not yet. Inside, they shared coffee again, seated near the hearth. He pointed to himself, then signed something unfamiliar. She didn't understand. So he took the coal and wrote, "My name is Toe. It means stands through storm." She smiled, wrote beneath it, "Mine is hope." But it wasn't always. "I chose it." He tapped his chest, then hers, then placed her hand on the edge of the table and traced it with his own. That night, the snow returned, soft, not angry, blanketing the past, burying old things. She woke near dawn to find him standing by the door, watching the horizon. There were no words between them. There didn't need to be. He turned, and for the first time he smiled. Not because he'd won, but because he'd stayed. Outside, the town would not forget. It would talk and judge and maybe even spit. But inside this cabin, 2 people who had once been nothing to each other had chosen something few ever dared. To see and be seen. To stay. And somewhere in the quiet that followed, she knew, storm or not, the next reckoning would come. But they would face it together. The storm broke 3 days after their quiet wedding, but its ending brought no peace. What the sky released in snow, the town returned in bitterness, colder still. They called her names. Not to her face, but loud enough for ears to catch. Mrs. Ray passed her in the mercantile and muttered heathen's bride. Children, once friendly, now ran from her shadow like it carried disease. Only Benji came still, quiet and loyal as ever, with wide eyes and a sack of dried apples his mother never noticed missing. Toe said nothing. He moved through it with stillness, like a river stone resisting the current. She'd learned to read his silence now, not emptiness, but focus. He spent most mornings working the fence that the winter winds had broken, or mending the broken wagon he'd found half buried in the snow. He rarely looked up when the riders passed. And they did, now more often 3, sometimes 4 at a time. Faces half covered in scarves. Rifles across their backs. They said nothing. But their silence was not like his. Hope began locking the door at night. They took precautions without saying why. She gathered salt and gunpowder. He checked the hinges, the latch, the stable's roof. They made a signal between them. 3 knocks on wood, followed by a pause. A simple way of saying, I am here. I am safe. Then, early one morning, they found the barn door split open. The goats were gone. Toe stood in the snow, without shoes, eyes scanning the trees. He didn't curse or chase. He simply picked up a broken bridle left behind, studied it, and handed it to her. No accident. They didn't speak of it again that day. But when night came, he laid his knife beside the bedroll, and she didn't ask him to put it away. The next morning brought the sheriff. He rode in with 2 others, men Hope didn't know. They stayed on their horses. He didn't. He tipped his hat at her. Ma'am. Morning. She stepped out onto the porch. Morning, she said. Her voice didn't shake. We've had complaints, he said. I imagine you have. They're saying your husband's making folks uncomfortable. Toe hasn't left our land in weeks. That ain't what they're upset about. He looked past her, toward the barn. They don't like seeing him here. With you. Married. She nodded once, then tilted her head. Then they can look elsewhere. The sheriff sighed. They're organizing. To do what? Run him out. Maybe worse. She crossed her arms. Will you stop them? I'll try. But if they come with fire, I can't put out fast enough. She didn't thank him. Just nodded, then turned inside. Toe sat by the hearth, whittling something small, another fox, or maybe a hawk. She stood for a moment watching the motion of his fingers, the calm they carried even now. When he finally looked up, she signed what she knew, danger. Soon. He nodded. She pointed to herself, then to him. Together. He nodded again. That night, sleep came heavy and short. She woke near dawn to the sound of hooves. They were not slow or measured. They came in a rush, too many for one wagon. Too loud for courtesy. Toe was already dressed. He touched her hand, then her shoulder. His eyes said what words could not. Stay behind me. She disobeyed. The door slammed open before they could bar it. 5 men. Faces wrapped. Guns drawn. The 6th, barefaced, was Lyle Dawson. His voice struck first. You got 2 choices. Hope said nothing. Neither did Toe. Either he walks out and we don't spill blood, or we drag him out and yours too. Behind Lyle, someone cocked a rifle. Toe stepped forward. Not fast. Not aggressive. But firm. He reached for a stick by the hearth. Not a weapon. Just a length of birch he'd been carving. In the snow outside the doorway, he knelt and drew. A circle. Then a triangle. Then lines between them. Symbols she'd seen before, etched into his knife handle. She didn't know the words, but she knew the shape of a story. He stepped back and held up his hands, then pointed to the drawings. Lyle spat. What's that supposed to mean? Benji's voice came from the trees. It means peace. The boy stepped out. Coat too big, cheeks red. His slingshot in hand, though useless. He's drawing his clan's mark, Benji said, stepping closer. It means, I stand where no blood will be shed. He showed me once. He doesn't want to fight. Lyle snarled. And who taught you to speak for savages? Benji looked at Hope, then back at Toe. He didn't. I learned it myself. Because I wanted to understand. The moment held. The men began to shift. Some uncertain. Some less sure. But Lyle wasn't done. He raised his rifle and pointed it directly at Toe's chest. You may not want blood, but I do. Hope moved without thinking. She stepped in front of her husband, arms spread wide. No, she said. You shoot him and you shoot me. You think that'll stop me? You'd rather murder a woman than let a man live with dignity? She looked at them all now, one by one. He fixed your wagons, chopped your wood, found your stray dogs. Never asked for thanks. Never touched a coin. Just gave what he had. Her voice rose, not loud, but strong. You fear him not because of what he's done, but because of what you haven't. You haven't lived with honor. You haven't chosen mercy. He has. Benji stepped forward. She's right. And if you shoot them, I'll tell everyone. I'll never forget. The youngest of the riders, no more than 20, lowered his weapon first. Another followed. Soon 3 men stood, without aim. Only Lyle held fast. Toe stepped forward now, past Hope, past the rifle's mouth. He looked Lyle in the eyes. And then he knelt. Hands open, empty. A man offering no defense but his own dignity. Lyle hesitated, then cursed and fired, not at Toe, but into the air. The shot echoed like thunder. Birds scattered. Benji ducked. Hope flinched. But Toe did not move. Lyle turned, mounted his horse. You'll regret this, he spat, and rode off. The others followed, some quickly, some ashamed. The snow settled behind them. Toe rose slowly. Hope wrapped her arms around him, not out of fear, but relief. He pressed his forehead gently to hers. Benji stood watching, hands in fists. They'll talk, he said. They'll still talk. I know, Hope said. But now they know who we are. Later, when the sky turned golden with the hush of late afternoon, Toe carved a final symbol in the doorway. One she hadn't seen before. A small line crossing a larger one. Like 2 paths joining. She touched it with her fingers. What does it mean? She mouthed. He signed slowly. Home. She smiled, eyes damp. For the first time in years, she believed it. Outside, snow continued to fall, not in threat, but in benediction. A storm might return, but so would spring.